5 Praise that doesn't demean. Criticism that doesn't wound. Please have a seat. We have a lot to discuss. I shifted nervously in the seat across from the principal's desk. Ms. Lander, as I'm sure you know, for the first 3 years of teaching you are on probation. My mind started to race. Probation isn't that for convicted criminals. Every year for 3 years you will have a minimum of 3 evaluations. This is your first. I want you to know that I believe you have a lot of potential, but you are going to have to work to earn tenure. Now is the time to learn from your mistakes. Let's look at Monday's lesson to see what went wrong. Reaching into a file cabinet, he pulled out a manila folder stamped probationary in red block letters. Then he leaned back in his chair and, with his glasses poised on the bridge of his nose, leafed through the copious notes he'd made during his observation of my lesson. Let's see. I believe the purpose of your lesson was to teach the students how to write a letter. Am I correct? Yes, Mr. Steele. What was he getting at? You told the students that you had a book with celebrities' names and addresses in it so that they could write to the star of their choice. That was your first mistake. As soon as you told them about the possibility of contacting a celebrity, they stopped listening to you and began talking to each other. You lost them. Instead of focusing on the protocol for letter writing, they were discussing celebrities. In the future I suggest that you refer to the district guidelines for curricular decisions. If you follow these guidelines with your students, they will be better prepared to take the state writing assessment in the spring. While employed in this district, you need to teach the standards as written. I tried to defend myself. I thought that if I generated a little enthusiasm for the letter writing. That brings us to my next point. The students' enthusiasm was expressed in a number of inappropriate ways. During your half-hour lesson 3 notes were passed, mouth noises were made, a desk was pounded on, and one student got out of his seat to talk to a classmate. Were you aware that all of that activity was going on in the back of the class? Well, yes, but the kids were just a little excited, Mr. Steele. He leaned forward in his chair. Ms. Lander, we have specific standards for conduct in our classrooms. You may not be aware of how quickly a problem can escalate. Students of this age are very volatile. If they aren't kept in line, the situation can easily get out of control. Even if we work with this celebrity letter idea, improvements can be made. I suggest you keep the focus of your lesson on the correct form of writing a letter and spend less time discussing which celebrities your students admire. The secretary's voice came over the intercom. Mr. Steele, the superintendent is on line 1. Would you like to take the call or shall I take a message? Mr. Steele looked at his watch. I'd better take it, he said as he flipped through more of his notes. Well, I have several other points to discuss with you, but perhaps you have enough to work on for now. I suggest you sit in on Mrs. Harding's class. She's a fine teacher. You could hear a pin drop in her room. Let's schedule a second meeting for tomorrow, so we can finish smoothing out the rough spots. Back in my empty classroom, I closed the door behind me and mindlessly sifted through the pile of papers on my desk. Tears welled up in my eyes. Didn't he like anything about my lesson? Sure, the kids were a little rowdy. But I'd rather have them excited about the topic than slumped in their seats, looking comatose. I wanted them to care about what they wrote, whether it was to a celebrity or a friend or someone in Congress. Isn't what they write just as important as how they write? I looked again at the stack of uncorrected letters lying on my desk, picked up my red pencil, and put it down again. I had no desire to mark those papers. No desire to teach. No desire ever to set foot in a classroom again. I heard a knock at the door. It was Maria carrying a folder filled with student drawings. Sorry to bother you, she said cheerfully, but could I borrow your stapler? Sure. You okay? Maria asked, staring at me. I just had a rough afternoon. I don't know. I'm beginning to think I should have gone into business instead of teaching. How can you say such a thing? You're a wonderful teacher. One of the best. I think you're outstanding. I looked up at Maria. She was smiling down at me, searching my face for a return smile. I managed to mumble, "Thank you, Maria," and handed her the stapler. A moment after she left, Jane entered. "You look as if someone kicked you in the stomach," she observed. I told myself to be professional and not burden Jane with my troubles. But one look at her face, and I blurted out the whole story. Jane listened and shook her head sympathetically. And to top it off, I said tearfully, "He said I was too animated, that I couldn't control my class, and that I should sit in on Mrs. Harding's class to see how a good teacher teaches." "Mrs. Harding?" Jane sneered. "He said you can hear a pin drop in her room. That's because the kids are asleep." "Jane," I burst out, "don't joke. He took the heart out of me." I know. I'm just mad that you had to be subjected to Steele's warped idea of constructive criticism." Maria was just in. I sniffled. "She's such a dear. She tried to make me feel better. Told me I was a wonderful teacher. But you didn't believe her." I wanted to. But all I could think about when she said that were all the times I wasn't so wonderful. "That's the way it seems to go," Jane sighed. "Criticism can knock the stuffings out of you. And praise like you're great, wonderful, marvelous is too much for anyone to take." I know. I wanted to tell Maria she was all wrong about me. Because it's hard to accept such extravagant praise. Did you ever notice how uncomfortable you get whenever anyone evaluates you? I know the minute someone tells me I'm good or pretty or smart, all I can think about are the times I was bad or felt ugly or did something dumb. That's just what happened. As Maria was insisting that I was the best, I thought of last Monday when I came to school tired, poorly prepared, and terrified that the principal would pay me a surprise visit. Jane laughed out loud. She meant well. People always mean well when they praise you. They just don't know how. What is there to know? That instead of evaluating what someone has done, you need to describe it. Describe it. Right. You need to describe in detail exactly what it is the person did. I don't get it. Give me an example. Jane looked at me intently. "Okay," she said. "Liz, you were required to teach your class how to write a formal letter and you could easily have settled for a standard lesson. But you knew that kids don't usually get turned on by headings and salutations and inside addresses. So you gave the subject some thought and came up with a motivation that fired your students' imaginations and had them writing with passion and purpose and correct form." I sat up in my seat. "That is what I did," I exclaimed. "It could easily have been a boring lesson, but I did get the kids excited and involved. And they did learn how to write a formal letter. You know what? I don't care what anyone says. It was a very good lesson." "Aha," said Jane triumphantly. "Look what just happened. All I did was describe what you did, and you, recognizing the truth of my words, credited yourself." Maria returned with the stapler and apologized for interrupting us. "Maria," I said, "don't go. You've got to hear what Jane has been telling me about praise. I want to know what you think of it." "Jane, please say it all over again." Jane obliged. She told Maria that children have trouble accepting praise that evaluates them. She said, telling a child, "You're so well organized," usually leads to not really, but the kind of praise that a child can take in, and that truly builds self-esteem comes in two parts. First, the adult describes what the child has done. "I see you're all ready for school tomorrow. You finished your homework, sharpened your pencils, packed your books, and even made your lunch." Second, the child, after hearing his accomplishment described, praises himself. "I know to organize and plan ahead." Maria looked distressed. "I don't understand," she said. "All I know is that the way I was raised wasn't good. My mother and father believed that they shouldn't say nice things about the children to their faces because they could get big heads. But I think children should get compliments. It helps them to be proud of themselves. I always tell Marco and Anna Ruth how good they are and how smart they are." Very gently Jane said, "So you wanted your children to have what you never did." Maria closed her eyes and nodded. But maybe I overdo it. When I tell Marco how smart he is, he says, Raphael is smarter. When I tell Anna Ruth what a great violinist she is, she says, Mama, stop bragging about me. That's the point I've been trying to make, Jane said. Children become very uncomfortable with praise that evaluates them. They push it away. Sometimes they'll deliberately misbehave to prove you wrong. Maria stared at her. Oh, my goodness, she said. Now I understand what happened in Mr. Peterson's class when I was helping out yesterday. What do you mean? I asked. This boy, Brian, who drives everybody crazy, finally sat in his seat and finished his work. So I patted him on his back and told him he was a good boy. I thought that would encourage him to keep on behaving himself, but it didn't. He crossed his eyes and let his tongue hang out of the side of his mouth and he fell out of his seat. I couldn't understand it. I was confused. And now you do? I asked. Well, according to what Jane has been saying, he had to make nothing of my compliment. It made him too nervous. He couldn't live up to it. He had to show me that he wasn't really good. But he was good, I protested. For the moment. Then Maria could have described the moment, Jane said. Yes, Maria agreed. Maybe I should have told him. That was the beginning of what turned out to be a long, animated discussion among the three of us. Describing a child's accomplishments, rather than evaluating them with an easy good or great, turned out to be harder than we thought, not because it was difficult to describe, but because we were so unaccustomed to doing it. However, once we got into the swing of looking carefully at a child's achievement and putting into words what we saw or felt, we did it more and more easily and with ever-growing pleasure. On the next 2 pages you'll see, in cartoon form, some of the examples we worked out showing how parents and teachers can use descriptive praise. Descriptive praise at home. Descriptive praise in the classroom. As we studied the examples we had worked out, we had many additional thoughts to share with each other. Descriptive praise takes work, doesn't it? If you're going to tell a child what you see or feel, then you have to really look and pay attention. It's much easier to say that's great or fantastic or terrific. You don't even need to think for that kind of praise. Jane, it's true. Descriptive praise is harder and takes longer, but look at the payoff for the child. Maria, I understand what you're saying, but if a child has always been criticized and has never heard any praise at all, wouldn't it be better for him to hear, you're a good boy, instead of nothing? Jane, if a kid is starving, even cotton candy is better than nothing. But why settle for so little? We want to give our children the kind of emotional nourishment that will help them become independent, creative thinkers and doers. If we train them to constantly look to others for approval, what message are we sending them? You can't trust yourself. You need everybody else's opinion to tell you how you're doing. Maria, that's not a good message, is it? Jane, no, because we want our children to trust their own judgment, to have enough confidence to be able to say to themselves, I'm satisfied, or I'm not satisfied with what I've done, and to make corrections or adjustments based upon their own evaluations. That evening I found myself actually looking forward to reading and correcting the letters my students had written. The first one was a pleasant surprise. Instead of very good, I wrote, a pleasure to read. Clear topic. Sentences and lively examples of how Michael Jordan affected your life. The second paper didn't disappoint either. I wrote, a thoughtful exploration of the problems of homeless people. My guess is the president will find your original proposal very interesting. I swelled with pride at the high level of my students' writing and took full credit for having inspired it. So much for you, Mr. Steele. The next paper looked as if it were written by a second grader. It was Melissa's letter to Barbara Streisand and it barely filled half a page. I picked up my red pencil and wrote, poor work. No inside address. Where's the date? Misspelled words. Undeveloped content. I looked again at my big, red, angry comments and thought, how could I do that to Melissa? That's the kind of criticism Mr. Steele threw at me. I was stopped in my tracks. It wasn't hard to praise what you liked, but how? Do you criticize what you don't like? How do you point out what's wrong, without demoralizing the person you're criticizing? Was there any way that Mr. Steele could have expressed his displeasure to me without discouraging me completely? I stared out the window. Maybe if he had started by appreciating what I had accomplished, however little I could have heard what bothered him, without going to pieces. Maybe if he had said something like, Liz, you've achieved your goals. You motivated your students to learn how to write a letter. The one thing I see that still remains to be worked on is how to generate enthusiasm for your topic and still maintain order. If he had said that, I could have heard him. More than that, I would have given serious thought as to how to prevent the kids' excitement from getting out of hand in the future. Maybe that was the key to helping children improve. Instead of focusing on what's wrong, start by acknowledging what a child has accomplished. Then, point out what still needs to be done. Okay, now what could I write on Melissa's paper? She hadn't accomplished anything. Or had she? I looked again and found it. I took out my eraser and made a red blur on Melissa's paper. Then I carefully inked in my new comments. I wrote, I like your line, you are my favorite of favorites. I think Miss Streisand will like it, too. I also think she would enjoy seeing an example of exactly what it is you admire about her. Please check your paper to make sure all underlined words are spelled correctly and that you've included the date and inside address. I look forward to reading your revised letter. It seemed to me that I'd come upon an important principle. Yes, we can all, teachers and students and parents, benefit from having an outsider with an objective point of view tell us how we can do better. But before we can even consider making changes, we need to believe that there is more right with us than wrong and that we have the power to fix whatever is wrong. To help myself imagine how this theory would work in other situations, I thought of two examples that might occur, one in the home setting and one at school. An alternative to criticism. At home. In school. Over the next few weeks I found myself thinking a great deal about praise and criticism. Mr. Steele's constructive criticism had left me hurting and discouraged. Maria's extravagant praise had left me feeling unconvinced and unworthy. But Jane's straightforward description of what I had tried to accomplish had put me together, restored my faith in myself, and given me the impetus to do even better next time. What a simple yet amazing process. I suppose that what Jane did for me is what we all ought to do for one another as we work at meeting the challenges of our lives. Teachers need to be affirmed as they struggle to meet the needs of all their students. Parents need to be affirmed as they contend with the daily difficulties of raising their children. Children need to be affirmed as they try to understand their world and find their place in it. In my perfect universe we would all be there for one another, holding up a mirror to one another's efforts and accomplishments so that we could all feel visible and valued. A quick reminder. Helpful praise/constructive responses. At home and in school. Child, listen to my poem about a train. Tell me if it's good. Adult, beautiful. You're a great poet. Instead of evaluating, you can 1. Describe what you see or hear. You caught the chug-a-chug rhythm of a train and you found a way to rhyme track with clickety-clack. 2. Describe what you feel. It makes me feel as if I'm sitting inside a railroad car speeding through the countryside. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Adult, look at those misspelled words. You can do better than that. Instead of criticizing, you can 3. Point out what needs to be done. All this poem needs now is the correct spelling of the words caboose and freight, and it's ready for the bulletin board. Questions and stories. From parents and teachers. Questions from parents. 1. My son is a terrific kid and I am always complimenting him. But yesterday he said to me, Mom, you notice me too much. Is there such a thing as too much praise? Your son's reaction is not unusual. Most children become very uneasy at hearing a running commentary about their behavior even if all the comments are positive. They feel as if they're under constant surveillance. Other children have a very different reaction to being noticed all the time. They become so accustomed to hearing an appreciative comment about everything they do that they feel lost without it and become less confident about themselves. Still other children experience constant praise as a subtle, unspoken directive to get them to perform according to their parents' standards and wishes. Often these children conclude, I have to give up thinking about what I want to do and how I want to do it and think about what they want me to do. I can't trust me. I'd better trust them. My daughter was in the middle of making a diorama of an early American kitchen and asked me what I thought of it. I told her I thought her teacher would probably give it an A. Was that okay? Whenever there's a choice between directing your child's attention to the approval of others or turning her back to her task, choose the task. You can tell your daughter, you took an old cardboard box and you're slowly transforming it into a colonial kitchen. I see a spinning wheel and a fireplace and, how did you get the little cradle to look so real? The most valuable kind of learning takes place when children are deeply involved in what they're doing, not when they're worried about how others will judge them. 3. My son finally brought home a report card with straight A's. I told him how proud I was of him. Is that okay? Anytime you're uncertain as to whether your praise is helpful or not, you can ask yourself a key question: are my words making my child more dependent upon me and my approval, or do my words help him to see his strengths and give him a clearer picture of his abilities and his accomplishments? Contrast the following statements. Praise that creates dependency upon the approval of others. A perfect report card. I'm so proud of you. Doing your homework. Good girl. You're a very generous person. Praise that gives a child a sense of his own abilities and accomplishments. These A's represent determination and hours of hard work. You must be proud of yourself. It takes self-discipline to do your homework when you're feeling tired. When you saw that Elliot forgot his sandwich, you gave him part of yours. Notice how the comments in the first column put the parents in control. They're the ones who have the power to bestow the praise or withhold it. The statements in the second column put the child in touch with his own powers and enable him to praise himself. 4. Can't you ever tell a child directly that he's considerate or honest or creative? Any kind of approval can feel good for the moment. But if you want these words to go inside a child and remain there, you need to follow or precede them with a description. For example, you knew I'd be worried if you weren't home when I got back from work. So you left me a note with a phone number where I could reach you. That's what I call being considerate. You told me what happened in school today even though you knew that I might get angry. I appreciate your honesty. What a creative collage. It has string and pasta and buttons and fringes. Made of toilet paper. In each case you are pointing out a single instance in which a child has been considerate or honest or creative. There is no pressure for him to always be that way. 5. I have 2 daughters. The younger is an honor student, but the older one struggles to get B's and C's. When they both show me their report cards at the same time, I try to avoid praising the younger one so that her older sister won't feel bad. Am I doing the right thing? Your response to one child's accomplishments should have nothing to do with what her sister has or hasn't accomplished. Each child needs to be affirmed for her individual achievements. Your younger daughter is entitled to time alone with you so that she can share her pride in her academic ability and have it acknowledged by her mother. Her older sister is also entitled to private report card time so that she can express her satisfaction or dissatisfaction with her schoolwork and receive support for her efforts. Neither of your daughters should receive less than her due because of her sister's talents. Stories from parents. This experience was reported by a mother who discovered for herself how evaluative praise inhibited her child's creative process and how descriptive praise released it. When my daughter, Jamie, was in kindergarten, she had a chance to enter an art contest. She didn't seem interested, but I pushed her into it. I suppose it's because I'm an artist. While she was drawing, I sat down beside her and kept saying, "That's great. Wow, I like that color. How about the feet? Shouldn't they be a little bigger? That's it. Stop. That is perfect." After a few seconds Jamie said, "Mom, why must it be perfect?" Then she put down her crayon and refused to do any more. At first I was upset with her. Then I realized that I probably talked too much. So the next time she brought a drawing home from school, I made no comment. But I guess she wanted me to say something, because she stuck it in front of my face while I was folding the laundry. It was a picture of a tiger and it was really good. With a few minor changes it could have been fantastic. But I controlled myself. I picked it up and just described, "I see you made a smiling tiger with orange and black stripes and a long tail," and, before I could go on, Jamie pulled it away from me and said, "This is the mommy. Now I'm going to make the baby tiger." Afterward, when I thought about what happened, I realized that all my helpful comments were my way of getting her to please me, when the person she really needed to please was herself. From now on I'm going to try and keep out of her way when she's drawing. I guess the only time she needs a comment from me is when she asks for it. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. This was from another mother who discovered what can happen when you resist the urge to evaluate. I returned home from a workshop on descriptive praise and noticed a picture lying on the kitchen counter drawn by my 12-year-old son, John. It was evident that he had left it there for me to see. As I walked past his room, he sat up in bed and asked, "Did you see my picture?" Usually my response would have been, "Yes, it's beautiful. You're really a wonderful artist." But being fresh from my workshop, I thought, okay, I'll try to describe. So I said, "Why, yes. I saw a huge plateosaurus floating in a lake and big trees and boulders on the shore and a highway stretching across the land." John smiled from ear to ear and began to share with me what he had learned about Champ, a sea monster spotted in Lake Champlain. As he went on about what excited him, I felt we were really connecting with each other. It was the kind of moment I treasure. And to think that it doesn't have to happen willy-nilly, but that I can make it happen, really excites me. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. This next story from a working mother describes a situation that could easily have caused her to scold her children. Instead she turned it into an opportunity to praise them. Ever since I took a part-time job, I've had many crises with my being late and my 3 children being locked out of the house after school. Finally, I decided to hide a spare key outside the house and told the kids to use it only in an emergency and to be sure to return it to its hiding place as soon as the door was opened. That turned out to be a great solution because at least once a week I had to work overtime. Then one afternoon I came back to the house late and found my 3 kids sitting around the table having an after-school snack, and there, on the kitchen floor, was the key. I said, "Oh, no, how did our key get on the floor?" My son, Nicky, said, "Oh, I forgot to put it back." I could see that he felt terrible about it, so I told him that I thought that it was pretty good. The kids all looked at me in surprise. I said, "Do you realize how responsible you 3 have been about the key? You've been using it for over a year now and this is the first and only time someone has forgotten to return it. I think that's a record to be proud of." The 3 of them beamed. Then Nicky jumped up from the table and said, "I'll put it back now." I never had to remind them again. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. In this account you can see how a son presented his worst to his mother and how she found a way to help him see his best. Paul wasn't a great student. He believed in doing the least he could in the shortest amount of time in order to get by. One afternoon after school he came into the house and just stood there. I took one look at his face and became alarmed. "What happened?" I asked. He said, "I just kicked in the garage door." I was shocked. "On purpose?" "I failed my algebra test," he blurted out. "And I tried. I really tried this time. I studied. And I failed." He was clearly in so much pain that I told myself that this was not the time to focus on the garage door. I felt terrible for him. For years now his father and I had been after him to apply himself, to try harder, and here he had finally done it. He'd honestly tried to do his best and it turned out that his best had resulted in failure. "Well, aren't you going to ground me?" he demanded. I didn't know how to respond. I only knew I had better hang on to whatever skills I had to keep us both from drowning. Tentatively I asked, "Did you bring the test home?" He reached into his backpack and threw the paper on my bed. It had a 60 scrawled across the top. I studied the paper and tried to figure out what went wrong. I said, "Paul, please, I can see how upset you are, but I need you to explain this to me. This first example, the one you got right, how did you arrive at the answer?" Paul explained a long, complex process to me, something about factoring a polynomial into a binomial. I tried to follow him, but couldn't. When he was finished, I said, "So you understood the theory, even though I don't. And you must have understood these other 5 examples because you got them right, too. What went wrong with the other 4? Paul leaned over the paper and said, "In these 2 I multiplied where I should have divided, and in these 2 I just made stupid mistakes in addition." "So what you're telling me," I said slowly, "is that you understand all this complicated stuff, but that you made 4 careless errors that cost you 40 points. All I can conclude is that you have a mind that can grasp advanced mathematical concepts, but that you need to make yourself check your calculations before you hand in your paper." Almost before my very eyes the tension drained from Paul's face. As he left the room, I took my first deep breath and felt as if I had passed some kind of test myself. 10 minutes later Paul returned. He said, "Don't worry about the garage door, Mom. I used the hammer, very gently, and I was able to straighten it out." "Thanks," I said. Questions from teachers. 1. I have a girl in my class named Jessica who is outstanding. I'm torn between my urge to praise her enthusiastically all the time and my worry that the other kids will begin to resent her and see her as the teacher's pet. Any suggestions? Trust your worry. You do Jessica no favor by constantly making public comments about how outstanding she is. It would be better for her and everyone else if you were to look for opportunities to show your appreciation for the entire class. What teamwork you all pitched in and did such a thorough cleanup, the custodian won't even suspect we did a science project today. When you're especially pleased by something Jessica has done, you can describe it matter-of-factly. I see how you managed to add up this long column of figures and get the right answer. It's because you were careful to put one number directly under the other. That's the kind of objective comment the other students can hear comfortably and possibly profit from. It would be best to save your emotional response to Jessica for a more private moment. That's when you can tell her why and how much you enjoy having her in your class. 2. Are there any objections to pointing out to a student that she's the best writer in the class or that he scored the highest mark on the math final? The problem with focusing on who is the best or fastest or brightest is twofold. The rest of the class can easily become discouraged. Some might stop trying altogether. And the star must now use all his energies not on his personal goals but on maintaining his stardom. Now his continued success rests upon the continued failure of his classmates. It would be much more helpful for your student to hear his accomplishments described without any reference to his peers. For example, you portrayed your grandparents' farm in such detail that I could almost see it. Or, every answer on this paper is correct. You really understand decimal points. Statements like these help a student to measure himself by his own standards rather than against his classmates' performance. 3. In my last school there was a heavy emphasis on having the children recite, "I am special. I am lovable. I am capable." The teachers were also encouraged to give out gold stars and stickers with smiley faces. Do you consider the above methods effective ways to build self-esteem? You can't paste self-esteem on from the outside. The affirmations and stickers you describe may adhere momentarily, but they fall off easily when the evidence suggests to the child that he isn't so lovable or capable or special. On the other hand, words that describe what the child is doing, or has done, last forever and can be called on in time of need. For example, if a student is worried about writing a report on whales, telling himself "I am special" or looking at his collection of gold stars will do him little good. But if his recent report on redwood trees had a comment like "full of interesting information. I learned things about these living giants that I had never known before," then the student might say to himself, "I did it before. I guess I can do it again. For you suggest that a teacher be quick to acknowledge whatever effort a student makes. But suppose a child asks a question that shows total ignorance. At one point, don't you have to tell her she's wrong and give her the right answer? Our role as educators is not to supply right answers but to help children arrive at answers through their own thinking process. You can start by respectfully asking a student what thoughts prompted her question and lead her to the next level of understanding with additional questions. A special education teacher reported that she was reading a story to her class about a beekeeper when Charlene raised her hand and asked, "Do a bee be a bird?" The class was electrified by the question. Several children raised their hands and waved them eagerly. The teacher said, "Wait a minute. Charlene, that's such an interesting question. What makes you think that a bee could be a bird?" Very solemnly Charlene replied, "They both got wings. Is there anything else that's the same? They fly." You noticed two things that were the same. Class, is there anything that makes birds different from bees? Birds got feathers. Birds is bigger. Birds don't sting you. Suddenly Charlene's face lit up. I know, she called out. A bee. Bee's an insect. All the heads nodded. On the board the teacher wrote the children's conclusion, a bee is an insect. Stories from teachers. An elementary school teacher reported that her children responded best to praise and criticism when she used a fanciful description. The following excerpt from her letter illustrates her playful approach. To the girl who swiftly finished her math test I said, "You went through all those examples like a mouse nibbling cheese." To the boy whose composition was difficult to read because he ran one word into the next, I said, "Oh, dear, those poor words are squished together. They look very uncomfortable. But look at these two words. They seem very happy. They've got lots of room between each other." To the child who had difficulty getting his letters on the line, I said, "This C is floating in the air, but this one is sitting right on the line. Oh, this N is sticking its feet through the floor and the plaster is falling in the neighbor's apartment." To help all the children during a handwriting exercise, I suggested that they have a beauty contest and circle the most beautiful letter on their paper to be the winner. Some children felt they had two equally beautiful letters. In that case both letters were declared co-winners. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. A fifth grade teacher reported how she used descriptive praise when her students were not behaving. The class was in an "I don't wanna, I'm not gonna" mood. They had endured a solid week of bad weather and were restless. When we all returned to the room from another indoor recess, the kids continued to play and run around. This is not usually a time when praise is the first thing that comes to mind, but I scanned the class and saw two kids who had settled down and were sitting quietly. I turned to the chalkboard and wrote their names under the words art time. Then I said to my model students, "You put your games away immediately when the bell rang. Now you're in your seats ready to see what's next." I appreciate that. The other kids looked at me and then at the two names on the board. A few of them quickly put away their games and hustled to their seats. I added their names to the list and said, "Thank you." 3 more sat down. It was wonderful. I didn't have to raise my voice or issue ultimatums. The kids saw what needed to be done and did it. For those slow to respond, the other students offered loud whispered reminders. But eventually they all settled down. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. This final story shows how a gym teacher in a city high school managed to give positive feedback to a rebellious, hostile student without undermining the boy's position with his peers. Carlos Hernandez did not like to be praised in public. He saw himself as a tough guy who didn't care about school or about what teachers thought. He was admired by the other kids for his defiant attitude. The only time he smiled was when he was being reprimanded for his behavior. Only then did he grin at his peers as if to say, "I showed em." During gym class, Albert, one of the less popular students, was having trouble making a basket. Some of the boys were telling him that he shot like a girl and others were starting to laugh. Carlos looked at the boys and shook his head. Craig, the ringleader, said, "What? You like him or something?" Carlos narrowed his eyes and said one word, chill. They chilled. They didn't say another word. They just shot baskets. When it was time for the class to head to the locker room, I yelled across the court in a gruff voice, Hernandez, I want to see you. A few of the boys clustered around the locker room door waiting to see the outcome. I looked over my clipboard at Carlos while turning my back to the other boys. With a stern expression and a low voice I spoke to Carlos. Hernandez, I saw what you did for Albert. It takes a strong man to stick up for somebody when others are laughing. You're all right. Carlos turned and ambled toward the locker room door. The boys who were waiting looked. 6. How to free a child who is locked in a role. In disbelief I read and reread the letter from the superintendent's office. The words shot through me, regret to inform you, budget defeat, cutbacks, transfer to a new school. Hemlock Elementary. 4. The first few weeks of the summer I managed to push the letter out of my mind. But as September grew closer, so did my anxiety at the prospect of starting all over again in a new school. I tried to calm myself. After all, a school was a school. Kids were kids. How different could Hemlock Elementary be? Besides, I had 2 years of teaching under my belt. On orientation day I discovered that I wasn't the only teacher in the district who had been reassigned to Hemlock. The assistant principal took all of us newcomers aside and briefed us on the school's disciplinary policies and procedures. His main focus was on the bad students and how to get tough with them. At the end of the day we were told that we would each be paired up with a mentor teacher, who would help us learn the right way to do things at Hemlock. I was glad I had the following day to prepare my classroom. I couldn't listen to one more explanation of the fine points of referral slips, detention, or suspension. I arrived early the next morning, eager to get organized. On my desk was a class roster with the names of 28 children. I studied the list and noticed that I had 18 boys and 10 girls. A tall gray-haired woman walked through my door and introduced herself as Mrs. Dittner, my assigned mentor. Reaching out her hand for my class list, she said, I've been teaching at Hemlock for 27 years and I can tell you everything you need to know about these children. I've had them all, and their brothers and sisters and some of their parents for that matter. Does this school have more boys than girls? I asked as I obediently handed her the list. She smiled condescendingly. Not really. You see, being a new teacher, you have to earn the good kids, so to speak. I informed her that this was my 3rd year of teaching, but she cut me off with, oh, you poor dear, I see you have Mary Ann Ryan. She's a real scatterbrain, completely undependable, no listening skills whatsoever. Shaking her head and clucking her tongue, she continued, and you've got Angie Milano. That one is sneaky. Can't trust her for a minute. She's full of lies and excuses. And don't tell me they put Joey Simon in your class. He's a very slow learner, has the attention span of a 3-year-old. Does nothing but clown around. I listened, dumbstruck, as she continued working her way down the list. Now how did Henry Burt get in here? He's an extremely shy child, very nervous, never opens his mouth, but he won't give you any trouble. And neither will Jimmy Potts, except for his dawdling and procrastinating. Oh, but here's Roy Schultz. He'll make up for both of them. Now Roy is smart, but mean, a real bully. And he has very poor impulse control. Just wait until you hear the filth that comes out of his mouth. I can't believe they gave him to someone as sweet-looking as you. Oh, well, there's always next year. With a class like this, one can only hope. She headed for the door and called over her shoulder, got loads and loads of work to do. If I finish early, maybe we can talk some more. Or, if nothing else, perhaps we can have lunch together sometime this year. I nodded politely, but as soon as she was out the door, my head began to ache. What kind of year was I in for? Could she be right about the kids? She made it sound as if their characters and personalities were immutable, written in stone. Incredible. Hadn't she read any of the studies showing the clear-cut connection between teacher expectation and student performance? Didn't she know that children are capable of change and that a teacher can be a powerful agent of change? A wave of doubt surged over me. Was I being naive? Foolishly idealistic? Suddenly I remembered a film I had seen years ago in an education course. An elementary school teacher, with a perfectly straight face, told her class that recent research proved that children with brown eyes were smarter than and superior to children with blue eyes. For the rest of the day the children behaved according to the new set of expectations. The brown-eyed children, thrilled by the news, performed better than they ever had in the past. And the blue-eyed children, even the brightest, were so shaken and upset that they couldn't do their work. The following day the teacher, again with a straight face, told the class that an error had been made. In reality, blue-eyed children were superior and brown-eyed children were stupid and inferior. Once again the teacher's expectations determined the children's performance. Now it was the blue-eyed children's turn to crow and excel, while the brown-eyed children barely functioned, immobilized by shame and self-doubt. The teacher's methods made me extremely uncomfortable, but there was no denying the results of her experiment. The stark evidence of the power of a teacher to affect a child's self-image for better or worse was forever burned into my brain. I would not fall into the trap of accepting Mrs. Dittner's perception of the children. All the kids in my class would have the right color eyes. But was I up to the task ahead? That afternoon as I walked my dog, I found myself thinking about Nicole, a bright, energetic girl in my homeroom last year. I had witnessed firsthand how her teachers, with no malice intended, had little by little cast her in a role. I heard her gym teacher yell, "Nicole, will you please pipe down? You never shut that mouth of yours." I heard her French teacher scold, "Nicole, put your hand down. I know you know the answer. Give someone else a chance to talk." I heard her music teacher say, "Nicole, must you always comment about everything? I'm not interested in what songs you think we should sing. Keep your opinions to yourself for a change." I heard myself say, "Nicole, your talking is disturbing to everyone. Can't you see people are still working on their tests?" Nicole flushed with embarrassment and stopped, but a few minutes later I saw her swing around in her seat and start gabbing with the girl behind her. In exasperation I walked over, took her by the shoulders, and spun her around. "Nicole," I ordered, "stop it. You are a regular talking machine." By telling her over and over again what was wrong with her, we all assumed that Nicole would listen and improve. She may have listened, but she certainly didn't improve. In fact, she seemed to exhibit even less self-control. It was almost as if she were saying to all of us, "If that's how you see me, then that's how I'll be." Maybe we, her teachers, were responsible for reinforcing her role as non-stop talker. Back in the house, I found myself considering Nicole's reaction to our comments from another point of view, a less sympathetic one. Why should the whole burden of changing Nicole's behavior fall upon her teachers' shoulders? Where was Nicole's responsibility in all of this? Why couldn't she have responded to our displeasure and made some small effort to improve? The phone rang. It was Jane's warm, comforting voice. "We all miss you here," she said. "How's it going over there?" I couldn't tell her fast enough about Mrs. Dittner and what she had to say about the kids, about my memories of Nicole, and my most recent thoughts about her stubborn defiance. "Whoa," Jane said. "I'm not at all sure that Nicole was defying you. Isn't it possible that she felt helpless to refute the picture all her teachers were giving her of herself? When you're a kid and you hear everyone say the same thing about you, over and over again, you begin to believe it." "What makes you so sure?" I asked. There was a long pause. "Jane," I prodded, "tell me." "Oh. I guess I was thinking about me when I was 12 years old and very insecure and what happened my first year away from home at summer camp." "You had a bad time?" "No, as a matter of fact, my first summer was wonderful. My bunkmates liked me, my counselor liked me, even the boys liked me. I learned to swim and to paddle a canoe and won the character award and returned home with a confidence I'd never had before. It was the best summer of my life." So all that positive feedback gave you a whole new sense of yourself. Now let me tell you what negative feedback can do, Jane continued. I returned to the same camp the following summer, but nothing was the same. My counselor was new and so were my bunkmates, a boy crazy, clothes crazy bunch who decided I was immature and a drip. I tried hard to make friends with them, but the girls drew a tight circle and shut me out. The boys were only interested in the new girls. Even my counselor gave up on me the first time she saw me pitch a ball, and called me a klutz. By the end of the summer I had given up on the final baseball game of the season. The captains chose up sides and I wasn't picked by either team. I sat on the bench and watched for a while and then walked back to the empty bunk. And, for lack of anything better to do, decided to wash my socks. I can still remember watching the suds and dirty water swirl down the sinkhole and feeling as if I were going down the hole with the dirty suds. Nobody wanted me. Nobody cared if I lived or died. And there wasn't a thing I could do to change it. I was silent because I felt for her and didn't know what to say. Finally I asked, Jane, are you trying to tell me that it's almost impossible to overcome the way other people see you? Maybe some kids are strong enough to hold fast to their own center and to continue to believe in themselves. I wasn't. Jane changed the subject after that, but when our conversation was over, I couldn't stop thinking about her 2 summers. Jane seemed like such a strong, self-assured adult that it was hard for me to imagine she was once an insecure kid, vulnerable to the way other people saw her. Then I thought of the children on my class roster that Mrs. Dittner had so neatly pigeonholed, and wondered about how vulnerable they might be. When I finally met my 5th grade class on Monday, I was relieved and pleasantly surprised. Nobody seemed too awful. Basically they looked like any other group of normal kids. But by the end of the first week it occurred to me, more than once, that there might be some truth to Mrs. Dittner's characterizations of the children. I pushed that ugly thought aside and determined to continue looking for the best in my students. The last thing they needed from me was another dose of toxic labeling. By the end of the 2nd week I realized that my good intentions were not enough. For example, when Mary Ann Ryan forgot her ruler again, I knew enough not to call her a scatterbrain, but although I was controlling my tongue, I couldn't seem to control my thoughts. I couldn't stop thinking of her as a scatterbrain and heard myself saying things like, Mary Ann, did you remember your lunch money today? Now don't leave your sweater behind again. Be sure to put your assignment pad in your backpack so you don't lose it again. It's true, I never called her a scatterbrain, but I was certainly telegraphing how I saw her. And I was doing the same with the other kids as well. I never called Joey Simon a poor listener, but I did tell him, through clenched teeth, Joey, try to pay attention this time, will you, please? I never called Jimmy Potts a dawdler, but I did urge him, Jimmy, just this once, don't be the last one out of the room. I never told Roy Schultz that he had a foul mouth, but the look I threw him conveyed the message clearly. I realized that I needed a plan. I sat down that weekend and made a list of the personality traits of my students that bothered me the most. Then I read the chapter in How to Talk So Kids Will Listen, on how to free children from playing roles, and rewrote the summary, substituting the word students for children. Freeing students from playing roles. Look for opportunities to show students a new picture of themselves. Put students in situations where they can see themselves differently. Let students overhear you say something positive about them. Model the behavior you'd like to see. Remind students of their past accomplishments. State your feelings and/or your expectations. Here, in cartoon form, are some of the examples I worked out as I imagined applying all the suggestions on my list to the children in my class. Look for opportunities to show students a new picture of themselves. Put students in situations where they can see themselves differently. Let students overhear you say something positive about them. Model the behavior you'd like to see. Remind students of their past accomplishments. But what if a student persists in behaving according to his old label? State your feelings and/or your expectations. I was glad I had made myself figure out what I might actually say to unlabel my students, because as a result of that self-imposed exercise, I truly began to think of them differently. And little by little, as I gave them a more positive picture of themselves, I saw changes taking place before my very eyes. Mary Ann Ryan actually remembered to bring in her signed permission slip for the field trip. Angie Milano owned up to borrowing Mary Ann's ruler. Henry Bird volunteered an answer. Joey Simon made a serious contribution to our class discussion. Jimmy Potts was on time for 3 days in a row. Roy Schultz went a whole week without starting a fight. And to everyone's astonishment, in a moment of frustration he banged his fist on the desk and yelled, "Oh, shoot." I was so excited by what I was seeing, I had to tell someone. Naturally I called Jane. "Every day," I said triumphantly, "I can see these kids letting go of their old roles and exploring new parts of themselves." Jane was delighted. "I congratulate you," she said, "and now you can congratulate me." "For what?" I asked. "For realizing after I spoke to you last time that I'd been casting my own children in roles." I was shocked. "What are you talking about? What kind of roles?" "Which children?" "Mine, Diane and Emily. They're so close in age and so competitive with each other that I wanted each of them to feel how special she was. So I told Diane she's the family artist and Emily that she's the writer in the family. I even threw little Jason into the pot and told him that he was our musician." "What's wrong with that?" I asked. "Those are all very positive roles." "That's just the point," Jane said. "Positive or negative, roles are roles. Kids get stuck in them and become fearful about trying any other way of being. Why risk not doing as well as your sister or brother? Or risk doing better," I said, "and having your brother or sister hate you for it?" "Exactly," said Jane. "I want you to know, Liz, that it was your determination to eliminate roles in your classroom that inspired me to try to do the same at home." On the next 2 pages you'll see, in cartoon form, what Jane reported as a typical conversation with Diane, followed by Jane's attempts to free her daughter from playing out the role she had given her. Locking a child in a role. Freeing a child from a role. I couldn't stop thinking about those 2 scenarios after I hung up with Jane. I know that if I were worried about having to write an essay and plagued by the thought that my sister was the writer in the family, I would take no comfort from my mother's insistence that I was the better artist. Not only would I feel too discouraged even to start my essay, but I'd probably think, if it's my art that gives me value in my family, what would happen if I ever stopped being good at it? Or if one day my sister brought home a beautiful drawing? Where would that leave me? But if I put myself in the second scene, where my mother focused only on me and pointed out my unique powers, I'd feel very different. I'd think, maybe I could tackle that essay. Maybe there were things I had to say about justice. It wouldn't even matter whether my sister was a good writer or a bad writer. She could be any kind of writer she cared to be. And I would be free to be me. So much to think about. I was clear in a way I had never been before. My role as teacher and Jane's role as parent was to be fierce about not permitting roles at all. No more labeling of children's characters. Every child needs to be seen as a multifaceted being, now shy and withdrawn, now boisterous and outgoing, now slow and thoughtful, now swift and purposeful, now stubborn and uncooperative, now flexible. But never the same, always in process, always with the capacity for change and growth. No more labeling of academic ability, above average, below average, mediocre, brilliant, slow. Every child needs to be seen as a learner and encouraged to experience the joy of intellectual discovery and the satisfaction of making progress, however fast or slow. No more singling out children with rare artistic or athletic gifts and showering them with attention at the expense of their less talented siblings or classmates. Yes, the gifted few need recognition and nurturing, but so do all children. Every child needs to be encouraged to experience the pleasures of sports, song, dance, theater, and art without worrying about having to be the star athlete or a musical genius or the class actress or the family artist. No more imprisoning of children's hopes and dreams and possibilities by locking them in with labels. Who knows what any of us might become if Just one person believed in us enough to help us explore our unexplored selves. A quick reminder. Freeing a child from playing a role. At home and in school. Adult, Nicole, you're a motor mouth. No one can get a word in edgewise. With you. Instead of labeling a child, you can. 1. Look for opportunities to show the child a new picture of herself. What self-control. Even though you had a lot more to say, you realized that others needed a chance to talk. 2. Put the child in a situation where she can see herself differently. Nicole, I'd like you to chair the class/family meeting and make sure that everyone gets a turn to speak. 3. Let the child overhear you say something positive about her. Nicole has so many wonderful ideas that it's hard for her to hold back. Nevertheless, I've seen her do it. 4. Model the behavior you'd like to see. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt. Please finish what you were saying. My thought will keep. 5. Remind the child of her past accomplishments. I remember the discussion we had on capital punishment. You listened quietly, but when you finally gave your views, some people changed their position. 6. State your feelings and/or expectations. Nicole, when other people are waiting to speak, I'd like you to keep your comments brief. Questions and stories. From parents and teachers. Questions from parents. 1. When we encourage children to stop playing roles like the big boss or the critic or Mr. Stubborn or Miss Sensitive, isn't there the danger that something good about the role will be lost along with the bad? Anytime we help a child risk another way of behaving, we have to make sure that we support whatever might be positive about the role he has been playing. The big boss needs to be appreciated for his leadership qualities. The critic needs to be commended for her powers of observation. Mr. Stubborn needs respect for his persistence and determination. Miss Sensitive needs recognition for her caring heart. 2. I'm trying to help my son change his role from undependable to dependable. Now I'm wondering if I'm not taking him out of one role and putting him into another. What do you think? It's important that we not cast children in any role. It would feel just as threatening to a youngster to be told, "You're always so dependable," as it would be for him to hear, "I can never depend upon you." Instead, point out to your son one instance in which he behaved dependably. You said you'd take responsibility for finding out the cost of your lost book, and you did. That tells him that when he chooses to be dependable, he can. 3. I still don't see the harm in telling a child, "You're always so dependable." Wouldn't that give him something to live up to? By telling a child he's always anything, you back him into a tight corner. He can either behave undependably in order to prove you wrong, or he can take on the new role given him no matter what the circumstances or inner cost. My ankle still isn't healed, but I can't let my team down. We want our children to be free of such constraints to be able to evaluate each situation as it arises and make a decision based upon their best judgment, not someone else's view of how they should always behave. 4. Is there anything you can do when one child labels another? I'm thinking of my daughter, Wendy, who calls her friend Susan mean and selfish whenever they play together and Susan doesn't give her what she wants. Never underestimate your power as a parent to influence the children in your care. When one child labels another, you can intervene to help them both see the best in each other. Wendy, how about asking Susan for what you want without calling her a name? I'll bet she can be generous if she's asked in a friendly way. Stories from parents. This first story was from the mother of a forgetful child. My daughter, Polly, is the original absent-minded professor. When it's time for her to do her homework, I discover that either she hasn't brought her book home, or that she lost her assignment sheet, or that she remembered her book but doesn't remember what pages she's supposed to do. Even her grandmother, who adores her, says she'd forget her head if it weren't attached to her shoulders. I've tried everything, being patient, yelling, giving her long lectures on responsibility. Nothing works. My husband keeps telling me that I'm only making things worse and giving Polly a poor self-image. Last week I got so annoyed with him, I said, "Fine. You take over." And he did. For instance, when Polly asked me for $3 for her field trip, I didn't make a big deal about how she lost her money last time. I just told her to speak to her father. He didn't have any singles, so he gave her a $5 bill and said, I expect you to bring home $2 in change. Just figure out a safe place to keep your money until you can give it to me. She did. She put it in her shoe and gave him his change when he got home that evening. About an hour later she went into a panic because she couldn't find her assignment book. My husband said, Polly, when you can listen, I have a question for you. She immediately said, what? He said, who do you know in your class who would have the assignment? She said, Cindy, and went right into the kitchen and made a phone call. Later, when my husband went into her room to say good night, he gave the $2 back to her and told her to buy herself the biggest assignment book she could find for the money and to write something on the cover that would help her to remember to bring it home. She said, like what? He said, any little smarty pie who could think of keeping her money in her shoe can figure out something to write. She said, I know. I'll write, don't forget me, smarty pie. Then she giggled. I have to admit I think my husband is on the right track. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. This next story shows a stepmother moving in to protect her stepdaughters from being cast in roles by unthinking relatives. I recently married a man who has non-identical twin girls. At our Thanksgiving dinner I heard their uncle jokingly refer to them as the beauty and the brain. It is true that one is unusually pretty and the other is an honor student, but still I was horrified. I turned to look at the girls to see their reaction. Neither one of them seemed surprised. Evidently they had heard him say it before. An aunt tried to change the subject, but I was so upset, I couldn't let it go. In a loud voice, I said, I've known Joy and Ellen for almost a year now and I can tell you, as someone who has lived with them, they are both endowed with superior intelligence. And to me they're both strong in the beauty department. I may not have endeared myself to the uncle, but I could see by the expressions on the girls' faces that they were glad I had spoken up. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. A PRent volunteer reported this next experience. I was assigned to a third-grade class of racially mixed and mostly very poor children. Many of their parents were migrant workers. The teacher took me aside on my first day and told me I would be working with Billy and Jonathan, age 9. Then she briefed me on their backgrounds. Billy came from a home of drugs and violence. Jonathan lived with his grandmother because his father was in jail. She warned me not to expect too much from them. They both like to make trouble and they're not too bright. As a matter of fact, in this school she paused here and lowered her voice. They call children like these throwaways. I couldn't get over what she'd said. Throwaways? Disposable children? Human garbage? Those were fighting words for me. I started my first reading lesson with the boys with the determination to do right by them. They yawned in my face. Billy told me he'd watched a late-night movie that ended at 2 a.m. and Jonathan said he was hungry. I found out later he'd had no breakfast. The next day I brought snacks to school for both boys and they ate while I read them a story. Then I gave them each a book with riddles and jokes and asked them to choose one to read aloud. Jonathan picked a joke about a farmer and his pig. I laughed at the punchline. Then Billy asked, "Can I read mine?" He read haltingly, but he seemed to understand the content. That day broke the ice for us. I continued bringing snacks and working with them on their reading and math. Little by little I realized the teacher was wrong. They were bright, both of them. Jonathan read with excellent comprehension and Billy was good with numbers. I never missed an opportunity to let them know how impressed I was by their rapid progress. And what a pleasure it was to work with them. It wasn't put on. I really fell in love with those two kids. After a few months they were reading and doing math on grade level and behaving cooperatively in class. I felt vindicated. I knew it was because I treated these so-called throwaways as important, respected children whom I treasured. A few weeks before the term was over, Billy's family was evicted and he had to leave school. When he came to class on his last day, he seemed sad and withdrawn. I told him I'd be sure to get his address from his new school, so that Jonathan and I could write to him. Then I hugged him goodbye and told him I'd never forget him. In the days that followed I found myself missing Billy terribly and wishing I could have had more time with him and wondering how long his better feelings about himself would last in a cold, rejecting world. Questions from teachers. 1. I've been told that on the first day of school I should inform my students of the rules and the consequences for not obeying them. Name on board, loss of recess privileges, call to parent, after school detention, etc., all the way to suspension. Now I'm wondering if this approach doesn't put the kids in the roles of troublemakers and send them the message that I expect them to misbehave. What do you think? Students tend to live up or down to their teachers' expectations. If you see them as faulty people who need to be fixed up and straightened out, they'll supply you with plenty of work. If instead you choose to look for whatever is positive and build on that, they'll work equally hard to justify your faith in them. One teacher reported that she starts the term by describing some of the more exciting projects she has in mind. For example, a class radio station makes it clear that she'll need everyone's input and involvement, and then, pointing to a list on the bulletin board, says, "Now let's go over a few rules that will help us to accomplish our goals. You probably know most of them already. That," she says, "lets my students know, right from the beginning, that I see them as basically responsible, cooperative, creative people who have something of value to contribute to their class." 2. What can you do if, despite your best efforts, a student persists in playing out a role? Persevere. Don't take the child's resistance personally. The youngster who continues to act out a negative role isn't necessarily out to get you. Chances are he's clinging to what is safe and familiar. He may need many repetitions of your new words and your new attitude before he can begin to trust you or to trust himself to experiment with new behaviors. 3. In the neighborhood in which I teach, the whole environment is so violent, some of the teachers seem to accept as fact the idea that these are junior delinquents who will be mean and rough with each other, even in their play, and that there's not much anybody can do about it. I'm wondering if you agree. The view you describe can be dangerous. When we adults stand by silently and allow children to hurt each other, in the name of play, we sanction a form of violence that can spill over into all of their relationships. We need to treat children not as they are, but as we hope they will become. 1 teacher who was deeply disturbed by the way her students callously hurt each other, both physically and verbally, reported that she was determined to help them see themselves as people who could be sensitive to each other's feelings. When their horseplay became too rough, she'd intervene with, "Hey, that can hurt." One way to tell if you're hurting someone is to look at his face. Does he seem upset? Is he crying? That will tell you you've gone too far. Once, at recess, she spotted a couple of kids holding down another in what had started out as a playful wrestling match. The boy who was pinned down was getting frantic, but the others kept laughing and piling on. When she tried to stop them, the boys protested that they weren't fighting. They were just playing and having fun. She replied, "In a play fight everyone should be having fun. You need to ask the boy on the bottom if he's still having fun. If he isn't, it's got to stop." In summary, she said, "I want my students to know that I won't allow them to brutalize or be brutalized while I'm around. For aren't children born with real personality differences? I've noticed that some of my students really are more impulsive or shy or aggressive than others. They're not playing out an assigned role. Just because a child is born with a particular genetic predisposition doesn't mean he has to be trapped by it. The impulsive child needs help and practice in slowing down and considering the consequences of his actions. The shy child needs to experience the pleasure of reaching out to others. The aggressive child needs to learn how to relate to others peacefully. We need to help all children become all that they can be." A story from a teacher. The following experience shows what can happen when a teacher is determined to see a student in a new light. Daryl Jackson was a large, obnoxious 10-year-old, twice as big as anyone else in my class. Because of his size you expected him to be more mature. But he behaved like a big, loud, goofy fool. He'd bop the other kids on the head, shove them, fling himself around, run out into the hall yelling, "Arg," if he heard someone coming. Anything to get attention. If that didn't work, he'd start talking in a loud voice about titties and doo-doo. The kids didn't like him, either. He was always putting them down. You didn't know that? You're stupid. On the bus for a school trip, he'd insist on taking up 2 seats for himself. In the lunchroom he'd gobble his sandwich and stick out his tongue with half-chewed food still on it and laugh. I found myself saying his name over and over again with increasing annoyance. Daryl, stop it. Daryl, be quiet. Sometimes I'd physically push him back into his seat. Daryl, I said, sit down. The underlying message in my voice was I don't like you. Your very presence annoys me. You are my irritant. Once, I became so exasperated with him I made a gesture of tearing my hair out. Daryl's eyes lit up with pleasure. With a big grin he said, I'm driving you crazy, right, Mrs. Bergen? He had achieved his goal. And not only with me. Every teacher in the school knew his name and they all hated him. At the lunch table they'd trade Daryl stories. He had succeeded in making himself famous throughout the school. It was almost funny in a horrible sort of way. He was so disruptive that I considered consulting the guidance counselor or the school psychologist about him. But there was a stubborn little part of me that decided to take him on myself. I knew that if there was going to be any small possibility of Daryl changing, I would have to change my tactics. But I also realized that I couldn't just do it mechanically. I had to find at least one quality in Daryl that I genuinely liked or admired. Without some real feeling for the child, the whole process would be an exercise in manipulation. Maybe that would be better than nothing, but I was hoping for more. The next day I watched Daryl like a hawk. His one saving grace was that he was talented at drawing. He could look at any object and reproduce it accurately. I saw Felix call him over to show him his drawing. Felix has poor hand-eye coordination and his drawing was barely decipherable. Nevertheless, he pointed to his squiggly lines and told Daryl, look, here's the man about to shoot the dinosaur. I thought Daryl would make fun of him, but instead he just smiled good-naturedly and pointed to the squiggles and said encouraging things like, yeah, and here's an alien coming down in a spaceship. That touched me. So Daryl could be sweet. Even generous. Maybe it was because he felt so secure in the area of art. From that moment on I launched my campaign of positivity. I started by choosing Daryl for small tasks like cleaning the chalkboard or putting away the world books in alphabetical order or feeding the turtle, and then thanking him for helping me. It turned out that Daryl liked animals. I put him in charge of the hamsters for the week and told him that the animals seemed to love it when he held them because he was so gentle. He beamed. Then I went to work on helping the other kids in the class see him differently. Whenever someone needed help, I'd say, oh, get Daryl to show you how that works. He's good at fractions. Or Daryl, you know a lot about animals. What kind of dog would make a good watchdog? I was hoping they'd think since the teacher didn't see him as a pest anymore. Maybe he wasn't. Whenever I absolutely had to reprimand him, I tried to preface it with something positive. Daryl, I know how hard it is to wait, but Felix needs to finish what he's saying. Or Daryl, I know it isn't easy to control the urge to get out of your seat, but right now I need everyone sitting down and paying attention. After a while Daryl started saying things like see, Mrs. Bergen, I'm controlling myself. Or, see, I waited my turn. Or I wanted to jump up, but I didn't. And I'd always respond quickly and warmly. I noticed that. Or, that was hard to do. Then I started writing short notes to his mother. Dear Mrs. Jackson, Daryl has been in charge of our class pets this month and all the animals are clean, well-fed, and happy. Sincerely, Mrs. Bergen. Daryl loved that. He asked me to tell his other teachers about him now. I was happy to oblige, Mrs. Kramer. Daryl drew a map of the United States and filled in all the states and capitals. From these small changes in my behavior came large changes in Daryl's. He became very affectionate toward me. He stopped annoying, shoving, and teasing the other kids. He was always jumping up to help someone. Draw or read or carry. When his new friend, Felix, had no money for a class trip, Daryl became despondent and later in the week lent him the money. He became a team player. The enemy of everyone became the friend of everyone. He shared his sandwich, candy, anything. He was Mr. Sociability. He was still loud and abrasive, but now those qualities were combined and tempered with socially desirable traits. The other teachers became aware of Daryl's feelings for me and used it to control his behavior. They'd say, "If you don't stop that, I'll tell Mrs. Bergen," and he'd stop on a dime. He didn't want anything bad about him to get back to me. But in the end his new behavior never did carry over to the other teachers. They still didn't like him, and he wasn't going to go out of his way to be cooperative or pleasant with people who treated him like a big nuisance. You couldn't intimidate Daryl into behaving better. 7. The parent-teacher partnership. It had been a hard day. He accumulated tension and excitement of meeting one parent after another had left me drained. And I still had a long evening of conferences ahead. No time to go home. I drove to a small restaurant in town, hoping to have a quiet, relaxing dinner before the next wave of parents. The man who parked his car in the space next to mine looked familiar. As soon as he stepped into the light, I recognized him. "Ken," I called out. "I'm so glad to see you again. What are you doing here?" Ken grinned at me broadly. "Probably the same thing you are. I've got 3 more conferences scheduled tonight and I need to refuel. How about sitting together? I want to hear how they're treating you at Hemlock. So much for my quiet dinner." Once inside we looked around the crowded restaurant for an empty table. There were none. A voice behind a waving hand called, "Liz. Over here." It was Julie, a friend from my high school days who had moved away years ago, and her older sister, Martha. "Don't look so surprised," Julie said. "I'm here for a few days visiting. Martha, come join us." I gestured in Ken's direction, trying to indicate that the two of us were together. Julie nodded, pointed to 2 empty chairs at her table, and beckoned to both of us. The first part of our conversation was an exchange of introductions and catch-up. It seemed that Julie was now a single mom, doing well on her own, and the baby was now 6. Martha's oldest boy was a teenager. I explained that Ken and I were former colleagues and that I'd been transferred to a new school, that he was still at the old school, and that we were both on a break between conferences. "Parent-teacher conferences," Julie said with distaste. "I've got one coming up next week and I am not looking forward to it." That seemed like a strange thing to say. After we ordered dinner, I said, "Sounds as if you might have had a bad experience at your last conference." Julie rolled her eyes and sighed. I was curious but didn't want to pry. Ken had no such compunctions. "Why? What went wrong?" "I don't know if you'd understand," Julie said nervously. "You're not a mother." "I would admit to that," said Ken. "But try me anyway." Julie paused a moment. Then she said, "I don't know if I can explain this. But, look, I think my daughter, Becky, is a great kid, but when I went to my last conference and the teacher told me, with this phony little laugh, well, to be perfectly frank, Becky is just a bit disorganized, and she doesn't always quite tell the truth," I felt sick inside. And later when I went home, I began to look at Becky differently and to wonder if she had me fooled and if she really was sneaky and disorganized. I was dismayed by Julie's experience. "That's terrible," I said. "You left the conference doubting your own child. And I probably shouldn't even be saying this," Julie went on, "but teachers have a way of making me feel as if anything wrong with my child is my fault. If only I did this or did that or spent more time with her or were a better parent, Becky would be a better child. And this may sound silly altogether, but sometimes I get this feeling that some teachers think they're superior to me because they have a college education and I don't." Ken raised his eyebrows. "Oh, come now," he said derisively. "Don't dismiss what Julie's trying to tell you," Martha said, jabbing the air with her finger. "I have a college degree and I also happen to be the vice president of my firm. But I remember very well how it feels to be put in one of those little kids' seats across from the teacher's desk and having to sit there while she tells me about my son's poor listening skills. In less than a minute I'm reduced to a scared little girl again being scolded by the teacher. Wait a second, I said. I'm getting confused. That's not my idea of what a conference ought to be, with the teacher doing all the talking and telling you what's wrong with your child. No. To me a conference is a two-way street. We teachers want input from you parents. We need it. That's the purpose of the conference. We welcome your ideas. Really, Martha said disdainfully. Then how come I feel as if I have to walk on eggs before daring to make the smallest suggestion? Because if, heaven forbid, I happen to offend the teacher by hinting she do something differently, and she gets angry at me, I know darn well she'll take it out on my kid. Martha, that's not fair, I protested, and it's not even true. Martha ignored me. But what really gets me, she continued, is when teachers use this patronizing tone. The problem with Michael is blah, blah, blah. I know you work, but maybe if you could spend a little more time with him, or if Michael doesn't start paying attention now, he'll never make it in the next grade. And the one that always leaves me feeling guilty and inadequate is, I'm sorry to tell you, your son is not living up to his potential. I was stunned by Martha's comments and embarrassed. I'd said those very words to a parent this afternoon. My first impulse was to launch into a long defense of myself and all my colleagues, but I decided to take another tack. Is there anything else that bothers you? I asked calmly. Martha pounced on my question. Yes. I hate it when they use teacher mumbo jumbo that makes you feel like an idiot. If you want Michael to decode phonemes and consonant blends, translation, read, then you need to spend an hour every night helping him with his reading program. And, Julie added, what parent has an hour a night after working all day? And shopping and cleaning? I know that by the time I've fixed dinner and done the dishes and the laundry and gotten Becky into her pajamas, I'm too tired to do anything but read her one bedtime story. Martha nodded in agreement. But what really galls me, she said, is that teachers feel no sense of responsibility to communicate with parents. I never hear from them until the problem is so serious that it would take a miracle to fix it, like when Michael was in junior high and he stopped doing his social studies homework. The teacher couldn't be bothered to inform me of that fact until the week before report cards came out. How's a kid supposed to make up 15 assignments in 1 week? This was more than I could take. Hold on, I said. Everything you say may be so, but please understand, teachers can have over 30 kids in a class with each one needing attention. It's unrealistic to expect a personal call every time a student falls behind in his work. Very coolly, Ken asked, what exactly is it that you parents want from teachers? Martha looked directly into Ken's eyes. Respect, she said. I'd like teachers to treat me and my child with the same respect they want for themselves. I could see the color rising in Ken's face. Respect, he snapped. What kind of respect do teachers get? Everybody dumps on us. We're held responsible for everything that goes wrong and we get it from all sides. Parents complain about us, the kids are rude, the principal demands that we fit more and more into the curriculum, the administration pushes us to be more creative as they cut our budget for the most basic supplies, colleges are dissatisfied with us because the kids aren't prepared to do college-level work, and business indicts us for sending them graduates who aren't qualified for the work world. But does anyone really support education? Is anyone willing to pay teachers what they deserve? The people in this community didn't even vote for the last bond issue. Julie was open-mouthed. The people at the next table had turned to stare at us. I was very uncomfortable. This time Ken had gone too far. But Martha was undaunted by Ken's outburst. Well, I voted for the bond issue, she said forcefully, and if it were up to me, you teachers would have gotten a big raise in salary and all the money you need to buy all the supplies you need. But what Julie and I are trying to say is that we parents feel disrespected and shut out of our children's education. It's true, we don't have your professional expertise, but we have a lot to contribute if you'd let us. We want to help. Parents help. Ken exploded. Like the ones who can't even be bothered to come to a conference because they'll miss their favorite TV show? Or the ones who are too drunk or stoned to even care? Or the parents who think nothing of keeping an older kid out of school to take care of a younger one? Or the parents who pressure us to give their kids A's because mommy and daddy are determined to get them into an Ivy League school? Martha didn't back down. Ken, she said, you're making an unfair case against parents. She turned to me for support. Liz, has that been your experience? I desperately wanted to lower the heat on this conversation, but Martha was asking for the truth and suddenly I needed to tell it. Not exactly, I said. I've had parents who were a joy to work with, but there are some with whom I would hesitate to bring up a problem. I told one father that his son was disruptive and that night he got a beating. And right now I have a couple who are in the middle of a custody fight. It's obvious to me that their child has some serious problems, but during the conference all they did was blame each other and try to get me to take sides. I guess parents are under so much stress today and in so much pain in their personal lives that it's hard for them to focus on their kids. I find I have to listen to them and their problems before they can even begin to talk about any problems their children might have. Martha threw up her hands. I give up, she said. According to you two, we parents are a self-centered, irresponsible, pathetic bunch. Don't take it personally, Ken said. We're just letting off steam. Of course there are wonderful parents out there. They do their best and then some. What you're hearing are the ravings of two frustrated teachers who care very much about your kids and who are upset because they don't always get the support they need from parents. Everyone fell silent. Very tentatively Julie said, I guess whenever I go to a conference, I worry about what the teacher will have to say about my child. It never occurs to me to think about what the teacher might feel or need. Well, in all fairness, maybe we should think about it, Martha conceded. Liz, what exactly would you want from us parents? Her question caught me by surprise. I thought a moment and said, honest information about how your child does at home, his interests, his worries, anything you could tell me that would help me to understand him better. And I guess if there are any problems, I'd want the parent to be willing to think along with me and work with me so we can end up doing what's best for the child. Martha nodded her head approvingly. And how about you, Ken? What do you want? Feedback, Ken said. I want to know which if any of my daily efforts on your kid's behalf is having an impact. What does he have to say about school? Or about me? Without some feedback, it's hard to make an intelligent decision about what he needs more of or less of. I don't disagree with that, Martha said. Ken sat back in his chair and extended his arm in a courtly gesture. Okay. Martha, the floor is all yours. You've had a few choice things to say about teachers. Suppose I turn your question back to you. What exactly would you parents want from us? Martha furrowed her brow. Then, speaking slowly, she said, to me, what's most important is to leave the conference with something I can hang on to. Some picture of my child that helps me feel good about him. I don't think teachers have any idea of the power they have or the effect of their words. Most parents have experience with only a handful of children. Teachers have hundreds of children over the course of their careers. A teacher's view of a child carries enormous weight with parents. When a teacher tells you your child is exceptional in any way, good or bad, you take it seriously. And you take the words home with you. I remember how irritated and disgusted I was with Michael when he was in preschool because he was so whiny and clingy and not independent and outgoing like the other 4-year-olds. But the day I had a conference with his teacher, everything changed for me. She beamed at me with pleasure and said, I'm so happy to meet Michael's mother. He is such an unusually warm and loving little boy. Her words went inside me like a light. I had never thought of him that way before. That picture she gave me of my son rang true for me and helped me through more times than she'll ever know. I was touched by Martha's story. I turned to Julie and put my hand on her arm. How about you? I asked. What would you like from a parent? Conference, Julie. I'd like to leave with something I can tell my child that will give her more confidence in herself. Something I can repeat to Becky when she looks up at me with her big eyes and asks, "What did the teacher say about me?" The rest of our dinner hour went by swiftly as we spoke honestly and shared what was most important to each of us in our role as parent or teacher and how we envisioned the ideal conference, first from the parent's perspective and then from the teacher's perspective. On the following pages you'll find, in cartoon form, the essence of what we said. The ideal conference, a parent's perspective. The ideal conference, a parent's perspective. The ideal conference, a teacher's perspective. The ideal conference, a teacher's perspective. After sharing our different versions of the ideal conference, we realized how remarkably similar our needs were. Both parents and teachers need appreciation, information, and understanding from one another. We both need to have our efforts acknowledged. We both need respect. We both need to work together, and to support each other, and to look for the best in each other, so that we can give that best to our children. When it was time to go, we exchanged goodbyes reluctantly. I think we were all feeling the enormity of the emotional journey we had taken in the short hour we had spent together. We had started out at opposite poles. It was parents against teachers. Us against them. Yet by the time we were ready to part company, we were all in the same place, on the same team. Bound together by our common commitment to our children's progress and our determination never to give up on any child. A quick reminder. The ideal conference. Instead of starting with what's wrong, one start by describing something right. Teacher, I enjoy Sam's thoughtful questions. Parent, Sam liked the lesson you gave on rockets. Instead of pointing out what the child hasn't done, to describe what the child needs to do. Teacher, Sam needs to make up all the work he missed the week he was out sick. Parent, I think he's feeling overwhelmed. He can probably use some extra help to catch up. Instead of withholding information. 3. Share pertinent information. Parent, he used to play outdoors when he got home. Now he just sits in front of the TV. Teacher, I see him yawning a lot lately in class. Instead of giving each other advice. 4. Describe what has worked at home or in school. Parent, ever since he's been sick, he seems to do better if he takes a short break every 15 or 20 minutes. Teacher, I notice he has more energy after recess. Instead of giving up on the child. 5. Develop a plan together. Teacher, I'll ask another student to help Sam with the work he missed. And I'll see to it that he takes more frequent breaks. Parent, and I'll make sure he watches less TV and gets some fresh air and exercise. Instead of ending on a negative note. 6. End the conference with a positive statement that can be repeated to the child. Teacher, tell Sam I have confidence that he'll be able to make up all his work. Also tell him that I enjoy having him in my class. Parent, I will. I know he'll be glad to hear that. Instead of forgetting the plan after the conference. 7. Follow through with the plan. Teacher, Jeffrey has been helping Sam and he's almost all caught up. He also seems to have more energy lately. Parent, my husband has started jogging and Sam has been joining him. Questions and stories. From parents and teachers. Questions from parents. 1. Is it ever a good idea for a child to be present at a conference? Sometimes I think my son might benefit from being there. At the beginning of the conference, both you and the teacher will need the freedom to talk to each other openly without having to worry about the effect your words might have upon your son. In the meantime, he can wait outside the room, read in the library, or play on the playground. However, at one point it may be useful to invite him in to be a part of the conference. Be aware of his vulnerable position. At his tender age he must now deal with 2 of the most powerful, significant adults in his life at the same time. It will help if you can start by sharing with him the most positive information you've exchanged thus far. For example, parent, I've been telling Mrs. Fisher how much the whole family has learned from you about the rainforest, ever since you started on your project. Teacher, and I've been telling your mother how much all the children enjoyed the pictures you brought in, especially the one of the red-eyed tree frog. The conference could end there. But suppose there is something that needs improvement? Suppose your son procrastinates or has trouble organizing his work. Either you or the teacher can broach the problem. Teacher, there's still a lot of work to be done before you give your final presentation to the class. Let's talk about how to go about it. From there on in, the three of you can discuss how to organize and schedule the many steps involved in completing a class project. Ideally, the teacher might say, think it would help if I set some additional smaller deadlines for you, like when to turn in your note cards and your outline and the first draft of your report. Ideally, you might add, would it help if I dropped you off at the library a few afternoons this week so you could start your research? Ideally, your son would volunteer, maybe I could write down everything I have to do and put a date next to it and then check off each thing after I do it. You'll know the three-way conference has succeeded if your child leaves feeling hopeful and motivated. 2. My daughter, Mia, is on the shy side. Last year she had a teacher who encouraged friendships in her class. This year she has a new teacher and is in a class with mostly new children. She doesn't complain, but I know she's lonely and unhappy. What's the best way to approach her teacher to enlist her help? Be prepared. Do some thinking in advance about what the teacher might do to help your daughter connect with other children. Is there a class activity Mia could be part of, a play or an art project? Is there some responsibility she might share with another child hall monitor or co-editor of the class newspaper? And be sure to ask if there is anything you can do to help, either with the play or paper or art project. Don't press for an immediate response. The teacher will need time to consider your thoughts and possibly come up with some of her own. 3. At my last conference, the teacher told me that my son, Tony, was lazy and uncooperative. I was very upset but didn't know how to respond. If it ever happens again, is there anything I can do? It's important to be armed with a pencil and paper when you go to a conference. If the teacher says anything negative about your child, you can inquire as to what specific behavior caused him to make his judgment lazy. Could you tell me what you mean by that? Suppose the teacher answers, he's the only one in the art class who leaves dirty brushes and open containers of paint behind him. As you write, say aloud, Tony needs to clean his brushes and screw the caps back on the paint jars before he leaves the art room. Suppose the teacher persists and says, and he's also uncooperative. Ask again, can you tell me what he does that makes you say that? If the teacher answers, he never shuts his mouth during silent reading. Again, say aloud as you write, Tony needs to control his urge to talk during silent reading. By translating the teacher's negative comments into a statement of what needs to be done, you will help point the teacher, yourself, and your son in a more positive direction. For this year, my daughter, Lisa, who has been in special ed, was mainstreamed into a regular class. Her teacher believes in making heavy demands upon his students and has always had great success with them. He's convinced it's because of his high expectations. Lisa is a hard worker, but she's barely keeping up. Her teacher is irritated with her and she's becoming very discouraged. What can I do? Our expectations should be strong but realistic. We do a terrible disservice to children when we insist that they can do what they're not capable of doing and urge them to try harder. A child who hasn't mastered addition or subtraction won't be able to do multiplication or division, no matter how strong her teacher's expectations. If Lisa is overwhelmed by her teacher's demands, then you need to help him understand her present academic abilities and encourage him to break down his large goals for her into smaller, doable tasks so that she can experience success, one step at a time. 5. My son came home from school the other day looking very agitated. He said that his teacher hated him. I wasn't sure how to respond. What would you suggest? After you acknowledge his distress, listen to what he has to tell you. Sometimes the problem can be quickly pinpointed and eased. Oh, so you were embarrassed when she yelled at you in front of everyone for taking the stapler from her drawer. You wished she had called you over and told you quietly. And I'll bet you wish you had thought to ask for permission first. If your son can't give you a clear picture of what's going on in school and continues to complain that his teacher hates him, then you need to speak to the teacher. Chances are she'll be able to tell you what's really going on, and then the two of you can tackle the problem together. Nevertheless, if during the course of your discussion you sense, not just from her words, but from her overall attitude, that she really doesn't like your son, then trust your gut feeling. Take the necessary steps to get your boy's class changed. Teachers are human beings. And some teachers, for whatever reason, rational or irrational, simply don't like certain children. It's nobody's fault. But no child should have to spend his days sitting in a classroom with a teacher who dislikes him. A story is from a parent. This story is from a parent of a gifted child who found a way to work with a rigid teacher. When Robin entered 5th grade, she seemed to lose all interest in school. From talking to her, I got the impression she was just plain bored. According to Robin, who reads at a 9th grade level, her teacher, Mrs. Post, insists that she read the same book as the other kids and that she never, under any circumstances, read ahead. I reminded her that it was still very early in the term and urged her to be patient. But I really became concerned when she started complaining about headaches and looking for any excuse to avoid going to school. I called her teacher and made an appointment to see her. The conference did not go well. I told Mrs. Post that I felt that Robin needed more of a challenge. Mrs. Post told me that what Robin needed was more self-control. According to her, Robin was restless and constantly distracting the other kids who were trying to do their work. I said, maybe she's restless because she's finished early and has time on her hands. Maybe she could be given some advanced reading materials. Mrs. Post looked annoyed and informed me that there was no reason for Robin to be doing different work from the other children. She also let me know that she had been teaching for 23 years and that the district-adopted curriculum was very effective in teaching the basics. I almost said, that's just the point. Robin knows the basics. What harm would there be in giving her some enrichment? But I didn't. I bit my tongue, thanked her politely, and went home feeling rotten. When I told my husband about the conference, he said, Mrs. Post probably thinks you're one of those pushy parents. Maybe you ought to speak to the principal about changing Robin's class. I considered his suggestion seriously, but the more I thought about it, the more I felt it would be wrong to take Robin away from her friends. The next morning I awoke knowing I had to find some way to help my daughter without offending her teacher. I called my sister-in-law, who is an elementary school teacher, and told her what was going on. She muttered something about teachers who were still in the dark ages and then told me about the program she used with the advanced readers in her class. She recommended some book titles for Robin and mentioned a book for teachers that gave some easy ways to evaluate the reading of a student who was doing independent work. It was called Responding to Literature. I wrote down everything she said and then went out and bought the book. The following week I called Mrs. Post and asked if I could see her again. She sounded cool and reserved and said that we had already had our conference. She didn't see the need for another. I told her that it was important to me to speak to her again. Finally she agreed. When the time came, I was very nervous. I didn't want to do anything to antagonize Mrs. Post again. I started by telling her how disturbed I was to learn about Robin's acting out in class and how worried I was about her recent change in attitude toward school. Then I told her I'd been trying to gather some ideas that might possibly help the situation and asked if she'd like to see some of them that I had written out on this paper. Mrs. Post didn't take the paper I held out to her. She continued to sit with her hand over her mouth. So I picked out a few of the items on my list and read them to her, like having Robin write a different ending to the book everyone was reading, or having her read other books by the same author and share what she had learned with her classmates. I also held up my copy of the book my sister-in-law had recommended without mentioning where I'd heard about it. Finally I said, Mrs. Post, I'm at my wit's end. I just don't know what to do to help Robin. That's why I asked for another conference. I wanted to hear what you thought of all these suggestions, and I also thought that with all your years of experience, you'd probably have many other ideas. Before Mrs. Post could say a word, I added, and I'm going to speak to Robin about fooling around in class. No matter how restless she is, you shouldn't have to deal with that. Mrs. Post continued to look at me in stony silence. Then she stood up and said, I heard what you had to say and I will take your ideas under consideration. Then she asked if she could borrow the book. I couldn't believe it, and thanked me for coming. We shook hands. The conference was over. That was a month ago. I have no idea what Mrs. Post is doing in class. All I know is that Robin seems to be enjoying school again. And her morning headaches have disappeared. Questions from teachers. 1. Some parents seem to have a school phobia. They hate to come to conferences, because bad memories of their own school days come flooding back. Is there any way to help these parents feel more comfortable? A warm, welcoming attitude is probably the best antidote to their anxieties. Some teachers have found that a table with a cloth, a pot of tea or coffee, and an adult-sized chair can help create a friendly mood. Parents report that they especially appreciate a closed door. It signals respect for the private time they spend with you. 2. If parents are divorced, which one should I invite to the conference? Invite both of them so that neither one feels ignored or shut out. It's up to the parents to decide whether they would prefer to meet with the teacher together or separately. In either case, it's important to use the conference time to focus the discussion not on their relationship but on how, singly or jointly, they can both do what's best for their child. 3. What can I do if a parent comes to a conference in a hostile or aggressive mood? Resist the natural urge to reason with the parent's anger, instead of, please try to calm down, Mr. Smith. We'll get nowhere if you keep on yelling. Acknowledge Mr. Smith's feelings. Let him know you understand the intensity of his emotions. I can see how angry you are. Please come in and sit down. I want to hear what's on your mind. This kind of approach is more likely to defuse Mr. Smith's strong feelings and to enable him to tell you what's upsetting him. You may want to consider writing down each of his grievances and reading them back to him so that he knows you understand. If, despite your best efforts, his rage persists, you can reschedule your conference. Mr. Smith, I can see you're still very upset. I need more time to think about what you've told me. I may even want to consult with other people on the staff. When can we meet again? At your next meeting you might want to have a third party present, either the principal, the guidance counselor, or the school psychologist. For some parents have complained to me that they hear from teachers only when there's trouble. I must admit they have a point. Is there any way around this? Parents appreciate hearing a little good news. One teacher said he makes it his business at the beginning of the year, while the kids are still on their best behavior and just beginning their academic tasks, to call two parents a night. He highlights each student's strengths and efforts. Then later in the year, if a problem arises, the lines of communication have already been opened and the parents are much more receptive to hearing about any problems that may have arisen. 5. How do I end a conference gracefully with a parent who goes on while other parents are waiting outside? It's important that the parent not feel that a timer has gone off and that he or she is being dismissed. You need to keep an eye on the clock and give some advance notice. I see we have 5 minutes left. Is there anything else you want me to know? If at the end of 5 minutes there's still more to be explored, you might say, I wish we had more time. Shall we talk on the phone or schedule another conference? Have your calendar open and be ready to set another date. A story from a teacher. This account was reported by a resource room teacher in an elementary school. When Christopher Boyle was assigned to my class in 2nd grade, I could see immediately that he was a bright, articulate boy. But it also became clear when I tested him that he had the classic signs of dyslexia. He couldn't even write his own name without leaving out letters or reversing them. What I didn't understand was why he was such a behavior problem. Belligerent, moody, easily upset. After a few weeks I decided to call his mother to see if she could help me. She was more than willing to meet with me and offered to come in that very afternoon. Almost as soon as we sat down, Mrs. Boyle described how every Night Christopher would sit at his desk and try to do his homework and cry. And say how dumb he was. Suddenly I understood what was going on. He was mad because he was convinced he was dumb and was taking it out on himself and everyone else. I explained to Mrs. Boyle that Christopher was far from dumb and that he was, in fact, a very bright boy who expressed curiosity about many things. But because of his dyslexia, he had to overcome problems most children didn't have. I also told her that Christopher was applying himself in my class and that in time I believed that he would learn to read. Mrs. Boyle seemed cheered by my assessment and asked what she could do to help. I told her that what Christopher needed from her was her understanding of his frustration and her confidence that, slowly but surely, he would make progress. I also told her that Christopher had an inquiring mind and would probably benefit from a trip to the library, where he could take out picture books on subjects that interested him. As the term wore on, it turned out that Christopher was a hard worker. I taught him one phonetic skill at a time and showed him how to sound out words and all the tricks he could use to differentiate one letter from another. And little by little he did learn to read and spell. All during this time I'd call his mother with progress reports and let her know that what she was doing with Christopher at home was showing in class. She did everything I recommended and more. She encouraged his interest in fish, insects, and rocks. He was always collecting rocks and asking what they were. She took him to museums and read books with him, and talked with him about all the subjects that fascinated him. What I did that was especially helpful to Christopher was to bring out into the open the fact that he did have a disability. The hardest thing for him was seeing other kids who were clearly not his intellectual equal read and write and spell with ease and get hundreds on tests that he failed. I wanted him to know that he was a highly intelligent person who was struggling against a learning problem called dyslexia. So I would say to him, Christopher, it's a big challenge for you to do this spelling, because when other kids look at a B they see a B, but when you see a B your eyes sometimes fool you and it looks like a D. So it makes everything more difficult. It's called dyslexia. But you've worked so hard that you've learned it all anyway. Christopher really liked talking about his learning problem. He'd say to the other kids, see, I have dyslexia. When I look at the word saw, I see the word was. And he'd write a word backward on purpose, laugh, hold it up to a mirror to show how the word came out frontward, and boast that he could do mirror writing. He was taking control of his disability, seeing it as something special and funny that he had. At our end of the term conference his mother told me that he was like a different child at home. Much happier, much more relaxed. She described how at a family get-together Christopher was playing school with his younger cousin who was also dyslexic. The cousin was becoming agitated because he was trying to write a word and having trouble. Christopher said, "Don't worry. I used to have that problem. I can help you. Let me show you this trick." Christopher is now in 3rd grade. His teachers tell me he's still reading slowly, but that he always participates, always has something interesting to say, and if they give him a little extra time, he does well on his tests. Whenever I think about Christopher, I feel good. Between his mother and me, we helped him see that his dyslexia was a challenge that he could overcome, rather than a disability that could define and defeat him. A parent and teacher story. The previous story described how teamwork between one parent and one teacher affected one child. This final story describes what happened when one school made a concerted effort to reach out to all the parents in a community and involve them in their children's education. My first teaching assignment was in a rural community of 710 people. Other than a country store and a 2-pump gas station, the only community activity that took place was at the school. Given this, I thought parents would flock to PTA meetings and parent conferences. Not so. On our first orientation night the auditorium was practically empty. A grand total of 15 parents showed up. Considering that we had 139 students enrolled in the school, I thought it was a terrible turnout. The next morning I expressed my disappointment to one of my colleagues, and she told me that after a while I'd get used to it. That seemed like a pretty defeatist attitude to me. At the end of our next teachers' meeting, I Asked if anyone would be interested in trying to get more parents involved in school activities. A few people chuckled and shook their heads. Somebody said something about me wasting my time, and the principal gave me a fatherly smile. When the meeting was over, I felt very foolish. But afterward, 2 teachers, Margaret and Pat, came up to me and volunteered to help. I think they felt sorry for me. The next day the 3 of us met after school to see if we could develop a plan. Pat told me what had been tried before and failed: the flyers never made it home. The telephone tree, each teacher calling 10 families, didn't succeed because many of the parents didn't have phones. Even the barbecue at Margaret's house was a bust. She said she'd invited 24 kids and their parents, but only 6 people came. I had to admit that was all pretty discouraging. Nevertheless, we decided to go ahead and plan a monthly activity that would somehow get parents more involved in the school. Our first function was a dessert social. Brownies and cookies supplied by the home economics class and ingredients supplied by the 3 of us. We mailed invitations to parents, placed flyers at the store, gas station, and volunteer fire department, and encouraged teachers to attend. The turnout was small, but at the end we recruited the help of 2 more teachers and 8 parents. Even the principal expressed appreciation for our efforts. The next month we hosted a spaghetti feed before the Friday night football game and had terrific results. Using the home economics room, 5 teachers and 8 parents cooked enough spaghetti for approximately 100 people. Granted, most of those who ate were players from both teams and their parents and relatives, but everyone had a good time. Before the evening was over, I grabbed a microphone and announced that on Monday night we were having a meeting to plan our next event and that we needed all the help we could get. 5 more parents and 3 more teachers signed on. The wall that separated teachers and parents began to crack and crumble. At our Monday meeting, one of the parents suggested that we write a monthly newsletter to keep the community informed of school activities. The principal was so impressed with the idea that he offered to fund the postage. The school's secretary volunteered to do the typing and copying. Parents and teachers offered to meet in the school's library to fold, staple, and address the newsletters. Those newsletters turned the tide. They became the communication link between us and the community. Teachers used them to express their concerns, and so did the parents. For example, we found out that some of the parents were very worried about their teenagers driving 30 miles to a larger town on weekends to find entertainment and ending up having accidents because of drinking and driving. A few of the teachers volunteered to chaperone dances or other activities so that the kids would stay in the community. Once the parents knew that the school wanted their input and help, they came up with ideas that went beyond our wildest expectations. They organized and sponsored a hot lunch program. Our school had no funds to establish its own. They hosted a carnival night and transformed the gym into an amusement park with game booths. They volunteered to help out in the classroom and became an invaluable resource. Mothers worked with children in the elementary school classes. A father taught a mini course in mechanical drafting to the sophomores. Another father, who was a chef, gave a demonstration for the home economics class. A group of parents, teachers, and students formed a project graduation committee and worked at fundraising all year to earn enough money to send the graduating seniors and chaperones on a chartered bus for a 3-day trip to Disneyland. The seniors had a great time and the parents were relieved, because their 18-year-olds weren't celebrating their graduation by drinking and driving. The support and involvement of the parents inspired the teachers to do even more. When Margaret discovered that some of the parents couldn't read, she organized a reading class for them. The class was such a hit that the one evening grew into a full adult education program, where parents could also learn writing, cooking, sewing, and computer skills. One of the teachers offered a night class for parents who wanted to earn their GED, and that, too, was soon filled. Everyone who took the class said their children were so inspired by seeing mom or dad study and do homework that their grades improved. The principal became our most enthusiastic supporter. It was his idea to institute a home visitation program for those parents whom we still hadn't reached. In our newsletter we announced that teachers would be stopping by the homes of their students for brief visits. Each teacher was given the names of approximately 8 to 10 students and asked to visit their parents at least once in the semester. Pat had the brilliant idea of using our own school buses for transportation. So each Thursday after school, teachers who wanted to visit a family could ride the bus with their students to their homes. At the end of the route, bus drivers would wait 30 minutes before doubling back to pick up teachers. The program was a huge success. Those visits by the teachers seemed to mean a lot to both parents and students. On the night of the last PTA meeting of the year, I came early because I wanted to run off some handouts for the parents. By the time I was finished, I heard the principal's booming voice and realized that the meeting had begun. I thought I'd slip quietly into an empty seat, but when I opened the door to the auditorium, I gasped. There wasn't an empty seat in the house. 8. The Dream Catcher. It was the last day of school. Large yellow buses with school District 71 emblazoned on their sides pulled up to the curb. As teachers dismissed their classes, students poured from the open school doors and rushed toward buses that were already bursting with clamoring children. Cars lined the streets with eager parents searching for their offspring and honking recognition. Mine was the last class to leave. The sun was very bright and the pavement hot. Waves of June heat hit my face. I hated saying goodbye. These children who had filled my days and my thoughts at night had become very dear to me. But with each farewell hug, it struck me anew that my time with them had come to an end. We would never again be connected in the same way. I stood there waving until the last child was claimed by the last parent. Then I turned and walked back into the nearly deserted building. Once inside my classroom, I sat at my desk and looked out at the empty, silent room. No one in the seats, nothing on the bulletin boards, not even a scrap of paper on the floor. It had been a whole year of planning and thinking and worrying and teaching. And now it was over. Finished. Did anything remain aside from a few memories? There was a soft knock at the door. It was Roy Schultz. Hi, Roy. Did you forget something? He shook his head and stood there, a strange expression on his face. What did he want? A final, private goodbye? His mother had called me earlier in the week and poured out all her concerns. She had lost her job at the mill. She and Roy were going to have to move to Chicago and stay with her sister. She didn't know if she could find work there. Her sister lived in a bad neighborhood with street gangs. Roy was giving her a hard time about moving. He didn't want to start all over again in a new school. Come on in, Roy. I missed my bus. Oh. Do you need a ride? Nah, I'll walk. Can I tell you something? Sure. Come in. Sit down. As he edged into a seat across from me, I caught my breath. Under his shirt, he was wearing the dream catcher I'd given him the day before. The circle of leather with a spider-like web of string inside it had been my parting gift to Roy. I explained to him that according to Native American legend, if it were hung over the bed of a sleeping person, it would catch all of the bad dreams and the bad spirits and let only the good ones in. I told Roy I wanted him to have it so that he would know that we were thinking of him wherever he was, and he had taken it from me with great solemnity. At that moment I knew he understood why I was giving it to him, even though until then I hadn't known myself. The dream catcher was my way of sending him off with some measure of protection. Roy had grown so much over the year, and not just in height or heft. He had stopped the name-calling and the racial slurs. He had made a monumental effort to stop cursing. He had stopped bullying and boasting. He bore little resemblance to the tough, angry kid who had swaggered into my room at the beginning of the term wearing a jacket with a skull and crossbones patch and looking as if he were spoiling for a fight. Now he was the student most often requested by other teachers as a peer tutor for the difficult children because Roy could manage them. What would happen to him now? What would happen to all his hard-won progress? How would he react to a hostile environment? Would he revert? Why wouldn't he? Why wouldn't any child? What was it you wanted to tell me, Roy? My cousin, He lives in this building I'm moving to, and he says when you live there, you gotta join a gang. Got to. Yeah, for protection. Against what? Against kids who want to beat you up. Oh. So you'd be under a lot of pressure to join. Yeah, but maybe I can make other friends. You've certainly made a lot of friends in this class. I guess you've got a tough decision ahead of you. I know. But I'm not gonna join no gang. I don't wanna do that kinda stuff anymore. I just wanted to tell you that. Then he shook my hand and left. I was overwhelmed. This 11-year-old boy had been wrestling with a decision that would have shaken a grown man, and he had opted to take the higher, harder road. Fervently I wished there were more that I could do for him. Moments later, as I gathered my belongings to leave, it occurred to me that maybe, just maybe, I'd done it already. Maybe the values I had tried to encourage within these four walls had gone inside Roy and become a part of him. And maybe those values would keep him from harm's way and help him to survive and cope. Maybe the spirit that I had tried to bring into my classroom was the real dream catcher that would protect all the children. Maybe out of the hundreds of hours and thousands of exchanges we had with each other, something would remain that would safeguard and sustain them, a core experience that would leave them stronger, more compassionate, more able to think and learn and love. Anyway, I'd like to